Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I'm not going to give you a full update on my wife and her cancer. I'm going to give you a brief one until we know more about what's going on. First, for those that are new, Ange was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer in October of 2022. She had a life-saving surgery, 12 rounds of chemo, and she beat it. We celebrated, we enjoyed summer of 2023, and then this thing came back as stage 4 colon cancer. So, after another major surgery, we were 11 rounds into a different chemotherapy. And recently, we had blood work that was very promising, but the doctors were still telling us that Ange would be on this chemo for life as long as it was managing the cancer. So that was a little hope for us, but also a bummer. I mean, who wants to be on chemotherapy for life? But then we had a CT scan to see where things were, and after the doctor looked at that, he was like, well, I want to get you in for a PET scan just to make sure things are where I think they are. While the PET scan did light up in some of her lymph nodes, the doctor's prognosis went from you're in chemo for life to you have a choice. And this is the first time that we felt like we had a choice throughout this whole thing. So our choice now is being that we can do another major surgery to get rid of the cancer, and if that doesn't work, we can do radiation. Why is it a choice? I mean, it sounds like a no-brainer, but the choice is, do we start with surgery? If we do and it works, great. But if we were to start with radiation and the radiation doesn't work, that means surgery is off the table because of the additional scar tissue that radiation would cause. But when you look at it on paper, radiation seems relatively painless compared to what Ange has gone through. It's like 5 treatments and she could be done in a month. Needless to say, we now have hope of a life without cancer, which we didn't have a couple of weeks ago. But before we can proceed with anything, we'll be consulting with 2 different doctors to find out the pros and cons of both treatments and what order to do them in, and the probability of success, and then we'll make our decision. So, while that was supposed to be a brief cancer update, it was a lot longer, so now you really have the full update. I'll let you know what we choose as we move forward. And sorry about always filling you in on this. I try to do it about once a month, and I like sharing here as it allows me to tell a ton of people at once instead of making a shit ton of phone calls to people. So thank you for bearing with me here. On a positive note, we have so much fun shit coming up. I'll be in Whistler when you're listening to this. Then it's off to Mission Ridge to MC their huge rail jam. And that rail jam has a huge cash prize and anyone can enter. So I highly recommend if you're anywhere close to Wenatchee that you head to this rail jam, and you can find out all the details on the Mission Ridge website. Then I head to Tahoe for the funnest weekend of the year, the Payne McShlonky, and then it's a week in London and a week in Paris. If you know things that we must do in either city, Paris or London, please let me know by emailing me at mike@thepowellmovement.com. That is greatly appreciated. Now it's time for me to talk about my guest this week. The reigning World Mogul Champion, a true OG skate-inspired snowboarder who's the guy that was every snowboarder's favorite snowboarder. I'm talking about Andy Hetzel. Not only is Andy a legendary, unappreciated guy in the realms of snowboard history, he's also my perfect kind of podcast guest. One who's in the sport when it was more of a lifestyle than a sport. And he was a guy who truly lived that lifestyle to the fullest, and he's not afraid to talk about what it was like in the early days of Breckenridge in Utah and early snowboarding. I felt honored to get Andy on the show, and I think you're really going to like this episode. Before we get into the interview, I want to ask all of you to share this podcast with your friends and subscribe wherever you listen. Both of those things really do help the show grow. I also want you to support the brands that make this show happen. And this week, and throughout the next few months, Seek Skate Camp, High Cascade Snowboard Camp, and Windell Ski Camp will all have ads in the mix letting you know about the best thing that you can do for your kid this summer and beyond. Along with camp, the brands that make this show happen are Outdoor Research, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Best Day Brewing, Stanley, and Elon Skis. Now, let's talk with Andy Hetzel. The X Games were this week, and it was a different production than last year, where it was almost like a joke. Last year, they featured influencers like Stony McBlaze and Snowboard Jesus. Did you see that shit, and what was your reaction to it?
Well, I'm not a big fan of the X Games to start with.
Okay.
And I watch a little of it. I try and catch it, but I don't watch the whole thing. But yeah, to me, as far as the influencers go in that, I didn't really notice that. I saw some shit on Instagram. In this year, I saw very little. I saw the men's pipe and the women's pipe, I think. what I saw, that they showed like the women's snowboard pipe was like a 10-minute show.
They did that to skiing too, which is kind of crazy in this time of equality that they would cut
Oh
the
yeah.
women's stuff. But that's bullshit for sure.
X Games has made so much money and not giving it back to the athletes, in my opinion, that it's just, I kind of lost a lot of, it's a great way for people to compete and make their sponsors happy. But, ESPN's always been banking on that stuff and not really giving back, in my opinion.
Well, when you think about it, you competed a lot back in the day, and you won the 1996 Coke Big Air. You won in 1997 ESPN Freeride and Slope and Boardercross overall championship. Yeah. 1998 ESPN Boardercross stuff. There was an Argentine Open. Were you able to win big money back then, and did they reel it back as they've moved forward, or was it always just screwing the athletes?
Well, that was an ESPN event. I think that was like 95. I won. It wasn't big money compared to, there was a heyday where like the European contests were like 50 grand you would win, or some of the contests. I think the most I ever won was 17 grand, and that was for like slope style, border cross, and a combined, which mid 90s, that afforded me to buy a house in Tahoe, or, put a down payment down. But, there was times like in Japan, I remember they were having like 50 grand or more first place prize money.
And that's insane, because that doesn't seem like that prize money is out there these days for the athletes, and it's a lot later on in life.
Yeah.
And we're not going to talk about contests too much, but was competition something that you enjoyed, or is it something that you just did for money?
Well, when I started out, that was like how you got sponsored. The late 80s, you'd compete in anything you could win money at. And that included like slalom, giant slalom, any event. They had the moguls. So that was just a way for you to get a result, to like mail your resume in and try and get some sponsorship. So I always competed. I always did pretty good. But then once it started to get really specific and people trained, they just did the half pipe. You had half pipe competitors or slope style competitors. I started to lose my enthusiasm, because I really wanted to like free ride and ride powder with my friends, and film was the goal. But, I always did decent at competing. So I kind of did that. I was doing border cross in the end, and then I just started not liking border cross. It was just go as fast as you can off the biggest jumps with the flattest landings, and a lot of times just man-made boiler conditions.
When you were doing border cross, it seemed like the course builders really didn't know how to build the courses that well, and you guys were always in jeopardy of hurting yourselves because of just everything not being spaced out correctly. Would that be accurate?
Oh, sure. I'm so freaking old that all those things were new. I will say the X Games had one border cross at Crested Butte where they had like kind of an open powdery mogul field at the top, and that was pretty sweet. But, even now, Squaw's got a decent little one here, the border cross course. It's good for kids. It's pretty safe. But when I watch border cross, like in the Olympics or any of that, I mean, the courses just look pretty similar, high speed pumping. I would love to do a border cross track where they had like gnarly whoops right at the beginning to weed people out.
Mm-hmm.
Jumps, doubles, and triples where you had to shut it down in order to hit tranny on the landing. Just technical stuff compared to what it is today.
When you think of those early contests, in the 80s, what was the vibe of it? Was it kind of like part contest and part party atmosphere compared to the atmosphere of today?
Yeah, they were the best. When I started competing was the Rocky Mountain Series out in Colorado. You would go to these events, you pretty much knew everybody. It was competitive for sure. Everybody wanted to do well, but the half pipe was like a ditch. The race was probably the most structured event. But yeah, it was a huge party. Tons of partying, pretty relaxed. But some of my best memories were from that. And then, eventually the half pipes got better. It got a little more serious, but just meeting so many cool people. And, a lot of times you get pros from other parts of the United States that you get to meet and hit it off with.
My last kind of thing about contests is, how about your thoughts about the Olympics when those were being talked about and people were saying snowboard was going to get into them? There was a definite hard line in the middle of some people really were excited about it because of the exposure it would bring to the sport. And then there were others that were like, it is going to suck the soul out of this sport. Where were you on that?
Well, that was to a point where I definitely wasn't racing.
Right.
I think it was like racing and half pipe. Border cross wasn't in it. So it wasn't really a consideration if I was going or not. So I didn't have a huge opinion one way or the other. But now I look back, Terge was right. He boycotted the Olympics.
Yep.
Because he said they were corrupt, similar to like the skiing federation. Now that I'm older, you can see like the last China Olympics, they held it, that industrial
like wasteland
park of a mountain. That, it's just got to be where money and greed is who decides who gets the Olympics, in my opinion. So I didn't have a huge opinion at the time, but now, the Olympics are similar to the X Games. It's a made for TV event. When I was a kid, I remember when they had the Olympics on and watching the ski, and they would show every frickin' skier. It was on like all day long. And now it's, you're lucky to see 5 to 7 people in the whole competition, and it's some made for TV deal.
And when you were coming up, it was like all the people that were competing, yeah, you guys were athletes, but I don't think anybody called themselves an athlete. And they really weren't like the caliber of people today, where the tricks that they're doing today, could you even think about anything like that when you were younger, when you were coming up in the snowboard world?
Oh, hell no. No, not in the pipe, park, big air, none of that. But, at the same time, I appreciate the little stuff that we did. I kind of laugh now because you watch the big air or you watch the half pipe or even parts of the slope style. It reminds me of skiing when skiing was moguls, ballet, and then the aerial.
Yep.
And now I feel like everything looks kind of like that aerial skiing was back in the day, similar vibe where you watch the people go off. It's gnarly, but you're at the same time, you're not that impressed. Do you know what I mean?
I do. It's always weird when you see a guy on top of his run practicing gymnastics, like almost stretches to like figure out his spins and stuff going into his run.
Yeah.
They're able to do some tricks with style, but when you see that part, it's like, oh, there is a gymnastics element to this.
Sure. And I'm a big advocate for less is more in airs and stuff. I'd rather see a giant 180 or a giant stylish 3 than a whatever the hell they're doing now. Like, what are they doing? Like
2160.
2160.
Yeah. Future spins, man.
Which is gnarly. Give them all the credit in the world, but that's just my preference.
I would love to see a contest that's like 359 and it's just all about style and you get everybody lined up knowing everybody can do every variation of that trick and it's whatever looks the best.
Yeah.
I think that would be sick. But enough about contests. We do have to throw out because everyone I talked to said that you were the reigning snowboard moguls champion. And I guess you probably won the last contest of moguls that they had in snowboarding.
Yep, that's correct. And that goes back to, I think that was 91. And it was like the World Championships. And it goes back to what I was saying is like you competed. I didn't love the bumps. I did them back then because snowboarding didn't have a full identity. We kind of competed in what skiing was, and skiing had bumps. So I think they had the bump contest. But I always joke about that I'm the reigning world champ, but everyone in at least the U.S. and, there's a ton of Euros competed in that event. Like you look at the start list for that thing, it was just stacked. And they all wanted to win. As much as it's a joke, I'm still stoked I beat a bunch of those fools.
I don't think it was a joke back then, right?
It was just like a strange event. I think I competed maybe in 3 or 4 mogul competitions, maybe even less. Probably 3. One in Canada, one in Breck, that one that I won. And I'll take that title, reigning World Mogul Champ.
All right, well, that's enough about contests. You grow up in Connecticut. And you were a kid before snowboarding was really a thing. Did your family get you into skiing early on?
I actually grew up in Arizona. I grew up in Phoenix. I briefly lived in Connecticut in 3rd and 4th grade where I learned how to ski. Yeah, I learned how to cross-country ski and downhill ski out in Connecticut. And then I moved back to Arizona right after that.
All right, so I had bad information. I thought you grew up in Connecticut and you moved to Arizona right around high school. But that sounds like I'm a little bit off on it. How about growing up with team sports, whether you're Arizona or Connecticut? I think you're a huge Kings fan now. Did you ever play team sports?
I played soccer right up to high school, and then I was on like a club team, and right at the time where I was traveling a bunch for that, I started skateboarding, and it got to the point where I wanted to go skate and I had to go to soccer practice instead. So I ended up quitting that. I did play football 1 year, but that was a nightmare. But right around high school or eighth grade, high school is when I started skating a lot. And that kind of took over any chance of playing team sports or any of that.
And are these the early Powell days? And like, did your boards have copers, lappers, and rails and all that shit that was normal back then?
Oh, yeah. They had more plastic on it than you could imagine, which was priceless. That time in my life, I would skate anything, but like in high school, I ended up skating vert and pools and listening to punk rock, and that really formed my personality or drive, I think.
When you say punk rock, you came up at like the perfect time for all the legendary punk rock bands.
Oh, yeah.
Who were the bands that you saw in Arizona, and like, did any shows stick out in particular?
I mean, good bands. They would come to Tucson, which was pretty incredible. And I remember TSOL came. That was a big favorite of mine. I don't think Minor Threat ever came, but that was a huge band for me. Big Boys, Black Flag did come. But the mosh pits, as like radical and out of control as they were pretty friendly. There was no sucker punching like there is today. And any mosh pit you would go to, you would be completely out of control and taking a beating. But if you fell down, people were right there to pick you up. I'm like terrified to go into a mosh pit now. I just watch them, if I go to like a Slayer show or something, it's just people sucker punching, and I don't even know what they're doing out there these days. Did you listen to punk rock?
I did listen to punk rock. I listened to more early hip hop, which I'm going to talk about as well. But I grew up in DC, so there was a lot of punk rock going on where I grew up.
Yeah.
So I was kind of right in the scene there. But I would say when rap first came on the scene, I was definitely into that. And that was where my shift went. And from researching you, I found out that you went to like an NWA and Too Short show very early on. And I'm so jealous about that. What was that thing like?
Well, I was a big NWA fan, that's for sure. Suburban White Boy, I think that was probably most of their fans.
Yep, me too.
Public Enemy. I wasn't a huge rap guy, but I definitely was into that early gangster rap.
So you've got rap, and then you're this punk rock skateboard kid. And back then, especially, I'm sure everybody sort of hated people like you other than other skaters. So were you always getting pulled over and harassed by cops, and did teachers hate on you for your look?
Cops, no, but the jocks like at our school would fuck with us a lot. I remember a buddy of mine got a mohawk, and this kid was not punk. He barely skated, but he got a mohawk, and he got like dogpiled by all the jocks at school. Like 25 guys jumped on this poor kid right out in front of the school. So not necessarily the cops, but I had like a goofy haircut, and I would catch a lot of shit. But, we were just kind of doing our thing. Me and a few of my buddies that skated, we would just skate and party and listen to punk rock and metal and smoked a lot of weed.
Did you ever get in any real trouble when you were a kid? Because that's pretty early on to be smoking weed, I feel like. Back then, alcohol was something that everybody thought was cool, but like if you smoked a joint, you were a druggie.
Oh, yeah. Did I get in trouble? Not really, but I was pretty wild.
And that was all through high school and then on? You were pretty wild?
Oh, yeah. High school and then I quit drinking like when I was 35 and haven't drank since. I figure I drank enough for 2 lifetimes between, like 13 and 35.
I hear you there. And back in Arizona, it doesn't really seem like a hotbed for snowboarding. I know Rick Kane created a surf career out of Arizona, but that was a movie. What did the Mount Lemon snowboard scene look like?
Nothing. I think I rode that lift once skiing. I don't know if I've ever snowboarded there. I used to be able to drive to the top. My buddy, he had like a VW, kind of a Baja off-road bug with a lightning bolt on the side, and we'd drive that thing up and hike around up there. Or I had a bunch of Mexican buddies and never really snowboard, but we would roll up there with a couple of my skate buddies, and we would hike off the side of the road with maybe 2 feet of snow. And we were like trying to jump cliffs. I look back on it now, where it was probably like 2 or 3 feet of snow on top of just rock. And it's just amazing that we didn't get severely hurt. But there was no scene. I mean, we never saw anybody. I had like a Burton Performer Elite. My good friend Steve Caldwell, he had one too. I remember the first time we went up there, he tried to ride with moon boots and just came right out, ended up in his socks, walking after his board. Yeah, there was no scene, but there was snow, technically an hour away. But, I skied. My dad, who I lived with, was really good about taking us up to Apache Sunrise, the ski area up there. And so I would go skiing a fair amount in the wintertime. And then they didn't allow snowboarding at the hill. So we would go, after skiing for the day, we'd go hike a couple runs just on the little hills there. And then eventually I started taking trips, and they started allowing snowboarding because it really wasn't allowed at many resorts back like in 85, 86, 87. I would say the majority of resorts didn't allow it.
And the ones that did, when you'd go there, did they kind of almost treat you like a second-class citizen? Like, what are these guys doing here?
Well, they would make you do a run, get an inspection, and get a card.
Like the
that
test?
said you were certified. I remember Purgatory, I'm pretty sure. They would have you get certified. And yeah, no, snowboarding was, in that age, it was looked down upon so frickin' hard. Like, we were just all derels. And skiing was kind of hurting then. It was more of like a elite, older sport, and I don't think it was really thriving.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break, and I want you to buy all of your ski and snowboard gear from Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. Why Peter Glenn? Well, first and foremost, they're the little guy who's been getting people out on snow for over 65 years. They aren't trying to take over an industry by making a ton of branded products that compete with the brands they already sell. They're not trying to get you to stay at a hotel or sell you a vacation. Peter Glenn is about making sure you purchase the right products to ensure that you're going to have the most fun on the hill. And they have all the brands, all the products, and incredible deals both in-store and online. While other retailers focus on algorithms and AI, Peter Glenn is all about having the most knowledgeable staff that understands what you need. And if you've been following them on Instagram, they've been dropping some incredible pro tips that will make your time on the hill more enjoyable. At the end of the day, people have trusted Peter Glenn since 1958 because of their proven track record and all-around passion for snow and beyond. So if you ski, snowboard, inline skate, wakeboard, water ski, or need outerwear for your adventure, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports is your one-stop shop, and they offer free shipping on orders over $50, a hassle-free return policy, and they price-match reputable dealers. So please support this podcast and buy your stuff over at peterglenn.com. Next up, it's Elan Skis. I started telling you about Elan building a cult following in the States about 3 years ago. And if you're like me and heading up to the mountain on a weekly basis, I know you've been seeing more Elans. There's a reason for that. People who ski Elans notice that skiing on award-winning products made in what is considered the best factory in the world will make them a better skier. The product they put into the marketplace is second to none. I mean, Elan's a company that also makes luxury yachts, and they don't cut corners on materials or production. The difference in quality is noticeable. Walk up to any ski wall and compare the craftsmanship of an Elan ski to everything else on the wall. You'll see a difference in the fit and finish, but the most important difference is how they'll perform on snow. That's why Elan's been winning a ton of awards at the magazine tests, because they really do ski better. If you want to have more fun on the mountain this season, get on an Elan. You can find out about all things Elan over at elanskis.com. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, and if you haven't been hearing a lot about Stanley lately, you must be living under a rock. They've absolutely blown up in 2023, and everyone is talking about them. I've been telling you about how incredible their products are at keeping your drinks hotter and colder than anyone else's for about 7 years now. I mean, they invented the category in 1913, and while they always have done well, the world now knows that if you don't have a Stanley, you don't have the best. And I love having the best. Personally, I use Stanley pint glasses every single day, and I swear by them. And my wife and so many others can't live without their Stanley quenchers. And recently, I've integrated Stanley food storage devices into my ski routine. Instead of buying $20 burgers, we bring our food to the mountain and it stays piping hot in our Stanleys. And I end up saving about $70 a weekend not buying food. While that's rad, what's even radder is that Stanley offers Powell Movement listeners their biggest discount that they make available to the public. I'm going to save you 30% on all your Stanley products. Here's what you need to do to get that discount. Head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and at checkout, enter the code SNOW30. That's all caps and the number 30 with no spaces, and you'll save that 30%. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. In your time, a lot of people saw ads in Thrasher magazine for like the Snowboard World Championships in Breckenridge. I think that's like 85, 86. And was that the inspiration for you to kind of move out to Breckenridge after high school?
Unfortunately, it was.
Okay.
Because I'm not a huge Breck fan. But it was, looking at the mags, and they had the World Championships out there, and coming from Arizona. When I graduated high school, I packed up all my shit in my truck and just moved out there by myself and found a room for rent side at the market, and was a lift attendant for 2 years. And, it was probably one of the best things I've ever done as far as just going for it and trying to follow my dream of just snowboarding. But I wish I would have moved to like Baker or Tahoe or Salt Lake City first.
But when you think about it, at Breck, it seems like there were so many heads that were already living there that were like so influential. I mean, I think Palmer was there. Was Ken Block there? And
Palm wasn't there. Ken Block, Matty Goodman, Mike Hatchett, Sean Farmer, he was there, and Zach Bingham, Jim Hale. Yeah, the scene was pretty sick.
Do they become all your friends really quick, all those people that you're mentioning?
Well, it's funny is because I moved there and I had to get a job. So I think I probably went in like October or something. And I found a room and I didn't know anybody. And then I found these snowboarders, and one of them was Jim Hale. So I would go hang out with these guys, and we would get baked, and they would just spray for like an hour how good they were, jump 50-foot cliffs and all this. And then eventually when it snowed, or it didn't snow, they blew snow in the man-made whales. We would go drive up the hill and build a jump. And I remember after listening to these guys for maybe a month and a half, I was like as good or if not better. And so that gave me some confidence there. And then eventually I got in with Rocky Mountain Snowboards and met Farm and Tony Perez and Zach Bingham. And it was rad. And I'm super stoked. I got to meet a bunch of Colorado people out there. Dave Dowd, who I ended up riding with on Kemper. But like Dowd, he's just a classic guy. Do you know him at all?
I don't know him personally, no. I mean, all these names I definitely know of, but they're all people. When I was coming up, I was seeing them in like Blunt magazine and shit like that.
Yeah. Dowd was rad because he taught me to carve. Like he stuck it in my head that it basically, if you can't carve, you're worthless. And that's stuck with me to this day.
Well, what board did you get that was the first board that you could really carve on? Because like with your first Burton, I'm sure it's like a 2x4 with no side cut and really hard to flex. What was the first board that actually worked?
Some of the Kempers you could carve on, and they made this goofy ass ASIM called an Apex. And I actually rode hard boots for a little. I tried to ride the hard boots. I was much better on soft boots, but any of those Kempers early on, you could tip it on edge. That was probably like 91-ish, 92, because I had a Burton and I had a Kidwell. The Kidwell, that thing was so heavy and freestyle oriented. Yeah, my first real board was I had a Burton Performer Elite, but then I got a Sims Terry Kidwell. That's what I kind of consider my first board because I could barely ride. The Burton had like skegs on it, and it was almost impossible to ride.
Yeah, totally. Back to Breckenridge and the Worlds. When the event happens and all these snowboarders converge on Breckenridge, is it fucking crazy to you almost that there's that many snowboarders in the world? Because I wouldn't think that you see too many that often.
Like the 87 one, I wasn't in. 87, 88 was the season I moved up there. So I wasn't in that one, but I did go watch it. And that was pretty incredible just to see all the people. And then the next year I think I made it in for that one. And yeah, I mean, it was Euros. And that was back when there was a actual Euro-US rivalry. Because most of the Euros were all hard booters.
Yep.
They were like pretty goofy, carving hard booters. They had no freestyle. And so there was a real rivalry there. I would say till right into the early 90s. There was a handful of Euros that could ride the pipe or, do an air, but the rest of them, we sure did talk a lot of shit to those guys. Peter Bauer and John Nerva. And right at that time, like in the early 90s, the pipes started coming around. That 87 pipe was pretty much a ditch with highways and Big focus point was where the racing was almost equal to the half pipe. It was pretty radical, though. I'm blessed to be part of that, where everything's changing every year, and it was priceless.
I think it's probably 89, 90-ish or right around there. Sponsorships were a totally different animal back then. And who were the brand? Like, how did it all start out for you?
My first sponsor was BC Surf and Sport out in Colorado, and they gave me like a pair of Quimbola Man bibs. And then I competed in that Worlds, maybe the 88, 89, and did okay. And Dave Kemper contacted me and gave me a board. And that was just freaking huge just to even get a board and some photo incentive. Nothing else. Photo incentive was just huge back then. But then I started doing that Rocky Mountain series and doing well. I think I won the overall maybe in 89, 90. And then I had some sponsors. But my Kemper was my board sponsor for like my first 3 years, I think. I had Bula, but Kemper was the worst. I fucking hated them. They were just such a corporate, it was Jamie Salter, and he had like Sun Ice was the clothing spot, it was like a package deal.
Yep.
So we had to wear Sun Ice, which was like a ski company. I Ski was the glasses. You sign this contract and you're super stoked, and then they just pull out this horrible fluorescent outerwear. The boards were pretty good for their time, and they had some decent boards, but boy, that company, the team was amazing. They had a massive team for a long time.
All-time team.
Yeah, massive too. Massive budget. That's when companies were just pouring money into it. Massive bar bills we used to rack up with those guys. But boy, I never really liked it. And then I had an option at one point. Sims contacted me to ride, and then Kemper just matched their offer. And for some stupid reason, I stayed with Kemper, which I still regret to this day because I could have got off of them.
It's funny that you bring up Jamie Salter, who is like the poison of all snow sports everywhere he's been, it seems like, in his career. I mean, he did Kemper, and that sounds like it was a shit show that was corporate and everything like that, and he made you wear I Ski. I think he was the poison that kind of ruined Ride and made Tim Pogue leave Ride. And these days, he's like the guy that owns Volcom and so many different brands out there. He's got like 100 brands under his, I think it's the American whatever group or whatever. And what was that guy like when you met him and he was younger? Was he just like a polo wearing kind of money guy?
He was just kind of a wiry little weasel, polo money guy. You just couldn't trust him was the gist of it.
And it sounds like that hasn't changed. Over the years, he's stacked hundreds of millions of dollars under his name. But whenever you hear anybody talk about him, they call him slimy and they call him just not right. I mean, that's what I hear. So
I haven't seen him in like, I don't know how long, 25, 30 years. Back when I started, I was so happy to get anything and to be paid. I'm like a barn from Arizona, from Tucson, Arizona, to be getting paid to snowboard. I never thought about it too much. And there weren't many companies. I kind of assumed everybody was kind of a corporate douche, was my initial take on it. But yeah, he definitely rubbed me the wrong way and was just about the money. Nothing to do. He could be selling women's shoes and he would have treated it the same way. He was never really passionate about it.
And then you living in Colorado, you had been there for 3 or 4 years. And I think there was a big Kemper team shoot in Snowbird in like 1990. And that was a year I think Utah just got pounded with snow. Was that like the reason for you moving from Breck to Utah, just because of the POW there?
Well, there was one trip when I lived out there. I think I was with Matt Goodman and Kevin Staub. We drove from Breck out to June Mountain via Salt Lake City. And then a buddy of mine I had met through competing, that he had come over to the Rocky Mountain series, Ben Pelligrino and George Johnson. Both of those guys came from Utah out to Colorado to compete. I met them, hit it off. And so I went and stayed with them and rode Brighton and the Bird on the way either to June Mountain for a contest or on the way back, or maybe both. I remember Brighton pretty vividly of having just bottomless pow, nobody around, and good terrain. Where Breckenridge, you can barely ride in the trees there. I don't think you can ride in the trees. They're so freaking tight. It's like a massive mountain and notorious, but as far as terrain goes. But yeah, I ended up moving out to Salt Lake City. I think that was 92 to 95.
You moved in with your girlfriend at the time. She's also a pro for Kemper, Tina Bassich. And was that
Yep.
the place where MCA would come stay? And did you get to be friends with him?
Yeah, I lived with Tina in Midvale, Utah. Yeah, and MCA would, I don't know how we ended up meeting him. I think he was just either up at the Bird or we had friends of friends, but he was extremely passionate about snowboarding.
She met him in Australia, I believe, because none of the dudes would ride with her. I interviewed her. And she ended up riding with him, but she didn't know it was MCA. And then she went in for lunch, and you guys were all eating lunch. And she was like, and I don't know if you were there or not, but they heard a rumor that MCA was there from the Beastie Boys. And sure as shit, that was the guy that she was riding with all day. And she was like, hey, if you ever come to Utah, you got a place to stay. And he called her up and he was like, look, I want to rent a room. I'm just going to pay you for rent for it. And whenever I come, I'll just stay there.
Yeah, Tina's got a hell of a lot better memory than I do, that's for sure. But I have some great memories of riding with him up at the Bird and him just being a humble, nice guy who was, he was learning to ride, but he kind of got thrown in with a bunch of aggressive snowboarding partiers. But he fit right in, and I took some runs with him up in Valdez, Alaska, where pretty out of his element, but just up there cruising, going for it, doing it. Yeah, I got nothing but fond memories of him.
And I think we can't really talk about Utah snowboarding without bringing up Andy Brewer. And can you describe who he is and why he was important to all things standing sideways in Utah?
Oh, God. Well, Brewer's he was good at everything he did. So I was huge into skateboarding, extremely passionate about skating. So Brewer, I met him through that Rocky Mountain series. He came out with Benny and George Johnson. And, if you skated and snowboarded back then, especially if you skated vert, you were just like instant buddies. And Salt Lake City had a skate park, Mrs. C's, with a vert ramp. And so we would go, ride in the day and have these really great vert sessions at night. And Brewer, he ripped. He was a good skier, really good skier. Snowboarding, he's like one of the first guys I've ever seen that really had a solid skate style up on the hill, like a ripping free rider with some skate style. God, he was such a good skater. He was way better than me at skating. Just super stylish, basically, at everything he did. Same with Benny. That's such a big reminder for me is back then is how I met a lot of my friends back then is if you skated, especially vert and snowboarded, it was like you were instant buddies. There just wasn't many of us out there.
So that skate scene is like so tight in Salt Lake City, and you got Benny, Andy, and when other skaters came into town, like I heard Gator and it sounds like Staub you already knew, and Tony Hawk and people like that, they would all come in, and did you meet them through skateboarding and then take them up to the mountain?
Staub I knew from my buddy Matty Goodman. I skated with him. I don't know about Gator. I'm not a Gator fan. I'm happy that he's rotting in jail. I actually met him snowboarding in Colorado. I don't really remember anybody coming to the park and then we'd take him up to the hill. Staub, he was into it. He did that drive with me and Matt Goodman from Breck to frickin' June Mountain, which is pretty harsh. 3 guys in the front of a Toyota Tacoma, no crew cab, no nothing. So he was always into it. Snowbird, that's some of the best snowboarding memories I have is the Bird back during that time period. Not many people. It's so fucking crowded everywhere today. But, just riding the tram, the crew that we had, Dome, Benny, Andy Brewer, George Johnson, there's probably 30 guys that really ripped the mountain and you knew everyone. Mikey Bassich, Tina, my buddy Matty Goodman lived out there then too. Another buddy of mine, Dome. Did you spend some time at the Bird?
Yeah, I've probably spent 2 weeks of my life there.
Well, they have the Cliff Lodge.
Yeah.
Right there, the hotel, the nice hotel.
Yeah.
My buddy Dome, he was a sushi chef. They had a sushi bar up at the top of the cliff. So we would go ride all day and then go up to the sushi bar, and he would make us rolls and, make us eat little baby octopuses to get some free sushi. It was just the best of times.
It sounds like you're living the life. And then being a pro meant that you had to travel too, and you had to promote your brands. And I hear the Kemper shop tours were just insane. Like, you're driving a van, there are trampolines involved. Can you describe what the madness of those tours were like?
God, I did have to do like a trampoline demo in fucking Montreal. That was pretty horrid. Yeah, that was horrible. That's embarrassing. But yeah, definitely shop tours, pretty goofy. Me and my buddy Brett Johnson, they had like a campaign. It was me, Brett Johnson, and Dana Nicholson were the exterminators. Again, just just embarrassing. But we were in Toronto, Canada, and we had this freaking van, this Kemper van, and we just wanted to go home. And if we wanted to use the van for the winter, we ended up driving it from Toronto to Colorado. No heat, and it was just, like probably January or something. It was the coldest freaking drive. We had sleeping bags and just absolutely freezing in this thing. I think we finally made it back to Breck and ended up running it off the road into a ditch. But yeah, that's kind of a horrible memory, those shop tours and that. I was happy to get off Kemper and move on to Palmer.
It's time for my final sponsor break, and I can't tell you how much I love my gear from Outdoor Research. When I signed on with OR, I knew there wasn't an outerwear brand on the market that performs as well as what OR is developing. That's what happens when you test your gear in the absolutely terrible conditions that we can get here in the Pacific Northwest. Days in the mountains are always more fun when you're warm and dry, and I know my OR gear will always deliver that. I'll tell you, on cold days, I live in my cold front hoodie, which is hands down the warmest and most stylish puffy I've ever owned. And then when I get on snow, my snow crew jacket and pants are not only warm, but it's one of those fits where if you don't see me ski, I look like a pro. I'm so impressed with the style that OR has been bringing to the table lately. And off snow, they sent me some Feroci pants, which are now my daily drivers. Think stylish, lightweight, packable, do-anything pants with the right amount of zippered pockets and stretch to be the only pant that you'll ever need. I've been loving OR products since I bought my first OR rain jacket in 2000. And really, if you missed out on using my old discount code for OR products, well, I'm working on getting you a new code, but I can't promise anything. Sometimes you snooze, you lose. So check back for that, and in the meantime, head on over to outdoorresearch.com and check out why they're one of the fastest growing brands in snow and beyond. My next ad comes from the crew at We Are Camp. I'm talking about the best ski, snowboard, and skate camps in the U.S. High Cascade is the snowboard camp, Windell's is the ski camp, and Seek is the skate camp. And if you want to be a great parent, I highly recommend signing your kid up for a week or two of camp. I can tell you from firsthand experience that going to Seek Skate Camp helped my kid in so many ways. Not only did he get so much better at skateboarding, he was able to make lifelong friends that have shared interests, and that's a hard thing to do these days. And whenever the subject of camp comes up, my kid lights up and starts selling it to whoever's listening because it was that fun for him. On top of all that, my kid has never been more appreciative and stoked. I mean, he's a high schooler, and sending him to camp helped make Aunt and I cool again in his eyes. And now we can hold it over his head. If you want to go to camp again, buddy, you need to get good grades. And so far, that approach is working, and I know you can use that approach too. I'll tell you more about the camps in the coming months, but for now, head on over to windells.com, highcascade.com, or seekskatecamp.com to find out all the details and reserve a spot. You only have your kid for a limited time, and sending them to camp will make them love you a lot more. My final sponsor this round is Best Day Brewing. If you haven't heard of Best Day, they are hands down the best tasting non-alcoholic beer on the market. I enjoy Best Day for so many reasons. The flavor is the most important. I swear by the hazy IPA, the Kolsch, and the Belgian White. They all taste just as good or better than their alcoholic cousins. And I'll tell you, while I haven't quit drinking, when I go to the bar, after 3 or 4 beers, I usually feel like it's time for me to head home, and everyone thinks I'm lame. But lately, I have a new routine. I'll have a Best Day every 3rd beer, and it makes my night last twice as long. And we all know lasting longer is better. If you want to have your best day or night ever, or just enjoy a few cold ones at Après, grab a Best Day, and you can forget about the calories, forget about the alcohol, and forget about getting in trouble on the way home. To see all the flavors and order some beer, head on over to bestday.com. And if you're flying Alaska, you can now get a Best Day Kolsch at 30,000 feet. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. Well, in thinking about sponsorships for you, there's one that I found that was really strange.
Can I just say this?
Yeah, shoot.
I made the worst sponsorship choices possible. I mean, not all of them are, but I sure made a lot of shitty choices. I definitely could have worked it and wrote for some good companies, and I did. But I look back now and I'm like, what the hell was I thinking?
I mean, just looking at the brands that you chose over the years, there was Kemper, I think Lamar, Palmer, Quicksilver, a lot of core brands. The last brand I'd ever expect for you to ride for was RLX Polo Sport. But there you are on the polo team in like 1999 in ads that really don't fit your image or lifestyle, it doesn't seem like. Was that a pure money grab?
No, I don't know. I mean, I don't know why I chose them. I think it was an option, and it wasn't a bad choice. Like, I rode for Quicksilver Pirate Surf for a while. I mean, their snow gear was like literally falling apart on the hill. That was, 6, 7 years before that, maybe 5 years before Polo. But Polo, I didn't get paid bank from Polo. I got paid decent. But I sure got a bunch of boxes of rad shit. They would send me like just crazy amount of stuff. That's when I was living up here in Tahoe and I had like a full suit that I would wear out snowmobiling at night. We would drive to the bars and the gas stations, and I ended up spilling gas on this one piece full suit and going to the bar just reeking like gas. And that's kind of my polo memory of, or just, $700-800 coats for back in that day was probably twice as much as anything else, and getting a ton of those.
Did any of your friends clown you for being on polo?
Not really.
I guess money is money, and they were paying you and getting you a lot of clothes, and that's cool. But thinking of money, what's the first year where you don't have to work at all and snowboarding pays your bills?
Well, I was living very modestly for even like when I first started snowboarding. I mean, when I was a lift attendant, I'd try to work as very little as possible, always take days off. But like our apartment I shared with a buddy, our toilet would like freeze over it sometimes. And we would go to like the Wendy's all you can eat bar and keep our plates for a week or two. And that's back when it was like almost legal to steal food and steaks and stuff if you just stuffed it down your pants. But as far as getting paid, that was probably 91, 92.
Okay, so like 5 years into after you've moved out to Colorado, you're able to pay your bills through snowboarding, which is pretty cool.
Maybe 4 years, yeah. I was pretty fortunate, and I did well at competing. And back then, that was kind of how you got sponsored, was contest results.
And while money is super cool, the one thing that I think everybody wanted to have at that point was a pro model. You've had a bunch. Was your first Kemper graphic the first one to have a skateboard on it, or did Slasnik have that one before you?
We came out the same year.
Did you guys know that each other was doing it? Because I would think all those skate kids gravitated together.
No, I didn't know. But I know Slaz talked a little shit with Roach because I was buddies with Palm. I don't even know what year that board came out, to be honest with you. Maybe 93.
Okay.
But Noah always thought I kind of bit his idea because maybe Palm told me, but Palm never told me. I skated a ton. Noah skated a ton. And they just happened to come out the same year. But that was kind of awkward and cool at the same time.
And then you bring up Palmer. He's always been like an incredible rider / athlete. Everything he does, he seems like he's good at. He's got a ton of attitude and maybe cockiness or ego, whatever you want to talk about, he's got it. When do you first meet him?
So back at those World Cups and at one point there was like some qualifying. I think it was at Purgatory. They had like a World Cup qualifier. So anybody who wanted to go to the World Cup, which was, traveling to Europe back in that day, would come out to the qualifier. And I'm pretty sure I met him out there. But we hit it off because Palm skates. He was one of the few. He's a ripping skater. I love Palm. I got just a ton of respect for him and just love him as a person. And one of the greatest gifts that I've got through snowboarding is to meet all these rad people and to call them my friends. And like he's definitely one of them.
And I read somewhere that you had a quote, or you said that you and Palmer didn't know what moderation was. So was it full on like rock star sex, drugs, and snowboarding when you guys were together?
I wouldn't say, well, yeah, we probably thought we were rock stars, but Palm was like 6 notches above everybody because he was a ultra double cocky asshole. But yeah, we were as wild as you can get. There was really definitely no moderation whatsoever. Back then you could get completely hammered and ride the next day. We were young enough to be able to do that. So it kind of worked.
What does no moderation look like at night? Like, are you guys trashing hotel rooms and getting in fights and shit like that? Or is it just drinking yourself silly?
I was never a big fighter, but Palm definitely gotten his share of scraps, especially in South Lake. But I've destroyed some hotel rooms. Not a ton of them. I think it was just a basic disregard for any laws or general decency. I mean, we never would harm women or anything like that, but a lot of stupid shit, drinking and driving, or just not giving a fuck, I would say, after a lot of beers. A lot of beers, a lot of Crown Royal. Palm's grandpa told him that Crown Royal doesn't give you a hangover, so we really took that to the next level.
And what did you guys do to get kicked out of High Cascade way back in the day?
Well, we didn't get kicked out of High Cascade. We got kicked out of Mount Hood.
The whole Mount Hood?
Yep.
What did you guys do?
Well, that was back when I was dating Tina. And, every year we would drive up to Mount Hood to go ride or, usually shoot photos, and we go dirt bike and stuff up there. But when we actually got kicked out, we wanted to skate the High Cascade mini ramp, and one of the guys just wouldn't let us skate it, and he put a chain on it, and then Palm ended up driving over it. He had like a super old Toyota Tacoma. I'm pretty sure I was in the car for that one. So we drove over the mini ramp. It didn't really screw it up, but it was off the ground. It was kind of impressive now that I think about it. So they got pissed off at us. High Cascade did. But then there was a ski patroller that lived in one of the campgrounds there. He had wooden furniture that was stolen, and we didn't steal it, but he blamed it on us. I think he went up to the mountain and told them that we had stole his furniture. So that summer after we left, I got a letter from High Cascade or from Mount Hood that says me and Sean are banned for life, which is pretty cool letter to find after 20 years.
Yeah, it's pretty rad. I mean, there's not many people that have that.
We went back, but honestly, I think part of that was our reputation. Part of that was us, but the kicker was the patroller's furniture getting stolen. That wasn't us. But God, boy, one year up there, my buddy, we went down, it was 4th of July, and we went down to Hood River, and they had a huge party at the campground down there. And it was Nathan Yant, who probably lives up by you.
Yeah, I know his wife.
And Ian Reuter and Palm and me and my buddy Matty. Nathan's running around going, South Lake, bitch! to all these kind of hicky local dudes. And this huge fucking brawl breaks out. I wasn't involved in it, but just sheer mayhem. So all these people are fighting. Mikey Bassett, his truck or whatever he was driving up to Mount Hood that year broke down just outside of Sac. So he rented a U-Haul, put all his crap in there, and he was living in his U-Haul up at the mountain. But he drove that down. So we all jump in the back of this U-Haul, and then there's cops there too giving out tickets, a bunch of minor in possessions and that. And my one buddy ends up stealing one of the cops' bikes, his mountain bike, and it had all the tickets in there, which was pretty cool because all those people got off. And then we had this freaking cop mountain bike inside the U-Haul, which is scary. And I ended up with that thing somehow, eventually. I didn't steal it, but I did end up getting it. I think my buddy owed me some money or something. That's a good example of some of the ruckus.
That's amazing. And so, pro models are one thing, and you had a few different ones, but another big thing back in the day was getting a cover. I mean, magazines were such a big deal. I think you get your first one in maybe 1990. What's the backstory? How do you find out? And how big of a deal is that shit to you?
Oh, the melon to fakie. Yeah, that was huge for me. That was a big stoker, the one where I had the 7-Eleven shirt on. You got to remember, like, back then, photo incentive was a huge deal. I don't even know if they have photo incentive right now. Do you?
Internet incentive.
I'm sure it's some kind of social media incentive.
Totally. There's like 2 magazines and like 500 people read them. So there's not really much incentive to get photos.
Yeah, so photo incentive was just huge. Any of your sponsors, they might not pay you much, but there was always a photo incentive schedule. So that first cover was massive for me. That was back when I was barely making any money. And it's a pretty cool shot. I do like that one. I had another one where it said fat. That was during some of my bigger drinking days where I was a little chubby and it said fat right on the cover. It was like a backside 180.
Does that piss you off or do you laugh about that back then?
Oh, no, I got a cover. I don't really care. Still made some money and was stoked to get it. But a lot of times the covers back then was if your sponsor's advertising in the magazine, you got, hell of a lot better chance of getting a cover.
And then you're a skater, and Thrasher every once in a while would run snowboard shit. Did you ever get in the pages of Thrasher? And does that kind of shit mean more than almost a Transworld shot?
I had some goofy shots maybe in like late 80s in Thrasher. Me and my buddy Brett Johnson, it was really, really, really early. And that was cool. I did have a skate pick. It wasn't like a sponsored skater or anything, but I did get a skate pick in Transworld skateboarding and pretty proud of that.
Well, the final piece of what it meant to be a pro back then was filming video parts. And I think you started out with Hatchet and like TB1, totally bored. What was filming like with Mike that first year?
Mike, Sleep When You're Dead, Hatchet.
Yeah.
It was amazing. Again, and part of that is my best memories are up here in Tahoe when we had snowmobiles and, it was very early on and you kind of didn't know much about the Abbey conditions. It was pretty adventurous to say the least, but both of the Hatchets are such like true professionals at whatever they do. They're like experts at whatever they do, and they got the funniest language to go with that. But yeah, that was amazing. I also filmed with John Freeman for like the Krusty movies, and that was pretty much a junk show.
But that's a different experience, right? Like you're going with these like professional dudes, the Hatchets.
Totally different. I mean, like we went to AK with Freeman, but he would find the angle that would make your steep ass AK run look pretty flat. He had a real knack for making shit look flat. I do have one good story about we were up there, and I think Adam Yout was up there too. Freeman, he had all these skits, and this year, I don't know what year it was, probably mid 90s is my guess. But we were up in Valdez, up at Thompson Pass, and I think I was with Nathan Fletcher, maybe Scabs, possibly Herbie was in the car, and we're in this van driving up. We get over the pass, and we knew Freeman was up there with Dana Nicholson, his sidekick, who would do all the skits with him. And there was a chopper up there, like a MASH style bubble chopper.
Yep.
You know what I'm talking about?
Exactly, yeah.
And this guy came from Anchorage, and he was just, like no permit. He was like bootlegging rides. So the few days before, we would meet this guy, pay him, God, I think it was like maybe $40, or it might have been less, to just give you like a quick hop up off the road. And his basket had like one strap with it with a Fastex buckle. The other strap, part of the buckle, had come off. So you're basically like putting your board in the basket and it's just sitting there. And he would run you up. And we did that for, a couple of days with this guy. Amazing, nobody died. But we're coming over the crest in the van, a few days later. And I look out and I see like this, what kind of looked like a giant bird, or it looked like a heli rotor flying up off the ground. And I didn't see the chopper actually crash, but it did ended up crashing. And Dana Nicholson was in it. and Freeman was on the ground filming him. It was like a James Bond skit. So Dana's got probably a 22. I don't think it was a big gun, but a 22 rifle, and he's shooting live rounds down towards Freeman. And then this freaking chopper ends up crashing, and Dana's all right. Thank God. It wasn't, I don't know how high it was off the ground because I just saw the snapped rotor like bounce up into the air. But, they both walked out of there okay, or all three of them ended up walking to the road, and the guy just left his chopper there. And I think he went back to Anchorage.
Dude, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And when you first get to Alaska, like your first time going there, and you see the peaks there, is there a fear factor? You're like, holy shit, we're going to ride that? What's the feeling like when you first get there?
I was pretty terrified. I was like on the second wave of Alaska.
Because like Farmer and Parada first, right?
Farmer, Parada, Liska, Fowler were the guys I knew. TB was probably up there like 20 years before all these guys hiking around in jeans
right.
with Zellers. But yeah, I was terrified. And back then they had like planes, and then you could get a chopper, and you had poker chips. You would just buy poker chips. Like one was red, one was blue. Like the planes were pretty mellow, except for sometimes you would be flying into a full whiteout glacier scenario where you're looking out the window. You can't even tell where the ground is. And then suddenly you land and they let you out and you got to ride down through the flat light. And then the heli, no guide, just point to a peak. And that was when Chet was flying up there. You would basically just point to a peak. Some of the runs would go back down to the road, and then some of them you would just kind of tell Chet to pick you back up. One time when we were there, I was with Matt Goodman and Mikey Bassich and Freeman, and we buy some of these poker chips, tell Chet to go drop us off, and we're going to ride down to the glacier, and we'll wait for him to pick us up. He doesn't show up for like 6 or 7 hours. And we had waited for it to clear a little, and we're just sitting out there. We got no radio, no nothing, just like shit. And it's probably like 9:30 at night now. And we could technically like walk down the drainage and walk across the glacier and eventually make it to the road. But it was probably, I don't know, like 10 miles, maybe more. And eventually he comes and picks us up. And it's 9:30 at night, still light and everything. The sun's getting ready to go down. He goes, "Do you want another run?" And we're like, "Sure." And granted, this is back when me and my buddy Matt Goodman rode for Pirate Surf. So we're wearing Quicksilver stuff, the shittiest outerwear you could imagine. We probably both had like down little vests on and some Quicksilver stuff that was just falling apart. We drop Freeman off. We get a quick look at Diamond, which we had never ridden, but we know it goes down to the road through the glacier. And then he flies us up there, and we ended up riding down that thing. And then we found our way down, all the way down to the road, which was, I look back now, and it's pretty amazing that we didn't die.
Yeah, man. And you guys are going out there without shovels, beacons, or probes or anything like that.
Well, here's another story. We go up there. This is back when the peeps had the earpiece.
Okay.
And so we're doing the beacon search. They would have you do a beacon search before you got on the heli, like if you're going out for a few days. But our guide, I don't know if he's just so baked or what, but we're doing the beacon search down by the airstrip or whatever. And I volunteer to go first, and I can't find the thing for like 5-10 minutes. It's like 15 minutes. And those things are kind of nerve wracking even today, like I'm pretty confident with my beacon, but it's always a little edgy the first few times. The guide ends up not turning the beacon on, and so I can't find the thing. Like he couldn't even find it. But we did wear packs and shovels. I think that time that we were riding the bubble chopper, either Farmer or Ranquet saw, "No packs, just nines." And so pretty much everyone took off their backpacks, and we used to buy a lot of weapons. So everyone took off their backpacks and carried their pistols. Yeah, it was as loose as it got.
Were there any close calls back then?
I never remember any big slides or anything like that. I think everybody just kind of lucked out in those first few years, from what I recall.
Another place that you guys traveled was Japan. And when you think about Japan, they're like a very proper and nice people that are very well mannered. And then you guys get there. Was it just like a shit show when you arrived in Japan? Did you rub people the wrong way?
Back then, we would travel to Japan for the World Cup and then to do like some shop demo deals. And I looked like an idiot, 100%, but I wasn't quite as like Roach and Ranquet had like green and red hair. So they probably took more heat than I did. And we partied a lot. But back then, you weren't allowed to go in the trees. You were really supposed to stay on the groomed runs. I haven't been back for a while, so I don't know what the policy is, if they're as strict about it now. But the good part about that is it was all POW. And as soon as you get off the groomer, it was just POW everywhere. So that was pretty amazing. I need to go back because I haven't been back in so long and just ride POW. Because whenever we would go, we would just go to compete. You know, you kind of fly in, go to Tokyo, party it up, go to the contest, compete, and then you're out.
Well, from what I hear now, and I'm sure from what you see in your social feed, it's just fucking POW every single year when January, February hits. And it was like that again this year. I don't know if it is right now, but a couple weeks ago, the photos that were coming out of Japan were amazing.
Everybody and their mom went to Japan this year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's because there's no snow anywhere, it seems like.
That's true.
And we're getting towards the end of my time, so I'm going to skip over the train gap, and people can see that. I think that was Easy Rider, and there's just so much stuff. We didn't talk about Whiskey 2. But regardless, when your career starts winding down, like, how does that play out? What's the end of your pro snowboarding career look like?
That was like a 2001 or 2-ish. I actually went, and I never really wanted to work within the industry. Maybe that initial Jamie Salter shit or, the initial companies rubbed me the wrong way. There weren't a ton of rider-owned companies like you'll see more so now. So I never really wanted to be in that. I actually went to film school in Maine with Brad Holmes. He's a good buddy of mine.
Nice.
And so we went out there, learned a little bit about filming, and I filmed for a couple seasons after that. But then snowboarding had changed so much that I ended up shooting like Euro kids, hitting kickers, and that just wasn't for me. And so at that point, my girlfriend was Cersei Wallace. I had a place in Tahoe, and we would kind of share time. And she built a house down in Cardiff, and she got pregnant. We got married. It was all wonderful. Had a wonderful daughter. I got into real estate just because I thought I wanted more of a normal job, and that filming wasn't for me. So that's kind of how I ended up getting out of snowboarding.
And these days you still ride a shit ton, right?
I ride a lot. I ride like 5 days a week.
And that's incredible. So you're still able to do it a lot, and you're sober now. So you've got a clear headed. You probably wake up in the morning feeling great. And you had an amazing long career in snowboarding when it is a very pivotal time to the whole sport. I would say that we're done, but we're not, because I have one more segment of the show. I call this thing Inappropriate Questions. And this is where I get someone that you know to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. And I'm stoked because you brought this guy up a bunch on the podcast. This time I was able to get a legendary Utah guy behind the scenes at Milo Sport. These days he runs Nitro. I'm talking about Utah Kingpin Benny Pelligrino to come up with the questions. And are you ready for question number 1 from Benny?
Oh, that name makes me smile. I love Benny. He's a smartass, though. A little nervous. He's got some dirt.
He did a good job, but I think you'll be able to handle it. Here's question number 1.
What's up, Andy? This is your old pal, Benny. You used to be quite the contest jock. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your big air debacle in Tahoe? How'd that end up?
Oh, Benny. Benny. That's a strangely proud moment for me. Kinda. But there was a big air contest at Diamond Peak, and the Palmer team was out here. The Palmer team then was Jason Isaacs and Ninja, Maddie, Palm, and Temple, and Greg Goulet. But for some reason, I really wanted, as a team bonding experience, was to go rollerblade naked down in Reno through the mall. This was kind of during the Jackass time and the Whiskey movies time. But I just thought that was the greatest idea. but nobody really wanted to do it. And then there was a big air contest, but it was like a small air contest at Diamond Peak. So we were pretty hungover. We went to Rosie's in Tahoe City and started drinking that morning. And then we eventually went back to the house, geared up, and went over to Diamond Peak. I don't even know if those guys even did it. We weren't even going to do the contest, but I got this idea that I was going to hit it naked. So I go to get on the lift, and they wouldn't let me on the lift. And so I ended up walking up to the contest through the trees. This is kind of embarrassing, but I'm just hammered. And so it was actually practice, but I'm pretty focused at this point that I'm going to hit this thing. I think I rode for Fila at that time, so I had like a white, shiny puffy with a silver chain on. So I take that off, pull my pants down, pointed out of these trees over towards the jump and the runway to it. And as I'm cruising by, and I think like I'm going to start flying, but I'm going pretty freaking slow.
Okay.
And I look around and I'm like, oh shit. And it's all like amateur girls warm up practice. So I'm pointing it towards the jump. And again, I thought I was just going to be hauling ass at that point, flying by everybody. And these patrollers jump out. They must have been watching me. And they freaking tackle me and take my board off and escort me to the bottom where the police took me in. And I got a nap at probably the incline substation or something. And they didn't charge me. I'm super grateful for that. That could have been like an indecent exposure charge or something.
Yeah, I mean, today you go straight to jail and you go for a little while.
Yeah. Or that indecent would have stuck with me for my life. So that was great. Then my team picked me up and we kept partying right on through.
Was that the kind of 3-strip photos in a magazine?
Oh, yeah. And then there was pics in it. I think it was in like the back page of Snowboarder. And I know my parents got a freaking subscription to this thing. So my dad calls me up after it came out. And he's like, son, is everything okay? But I'm oddly proud of it. But that was a little tough to say for a podcast. Thanks, Ben.
Well, I thank you for saying it. You don't have to register on any lists, which is incredible because today you would have to. Let's go with this question number 2.
Henry Rollins used to sing in a band called SOA out of Washington, D.C. I always thought it stood for Surfing on Acid. Apparently it's called State of Alert. But, Andy, Purgatory, World Cup qualifying contest in the early 90s. Tell us a little bit about truck surfing on acid.
Question number 2. He delivers.
Right under the fucking bus, man.
But you're clean and sober these days, so it's not like you're doing anything bad.
I don't drink. I'm not sober.
Okay, sorry, my bad.
No worries. I just need to clarify that. You know, I don't remember truck surfing, but I will tell you there was some hallucinogenics with Dan Donnelly. Yeah, I ended up winning. There was this little ghetto mini ramp in a garage that they had a party at. These snowboarders had a party at the night before this was actually the half pipe. And I was skating the thing, of course, like going all out, and ended up spraining my ankle pretty good. And they were having a luau the next night. So there was a pig hanging up right next to the mini ramp, like a pig that was gutted.
Okay.
Anyways, I wasn't able to compete in the half pipe because I rolled my ankle, but I still ended up winning the overall for the Rocky Mountain Series. And then took that trophy and filled it with some Long Island iced teas and went pretty berserk. Me and my buddy Dan Donnelly, who I got to meet through snowboarding. I love the guy.
He's a Northwest legend, right?
He is an absolute legend. He's a Mount Vernon pinup boy. More style in that guy than 90% of the riders out there. So we hop on this tourist bus that's leaving and hop on it and start screaming, and it stops. And then it just went crazy from there. I don't know what Benny's talking about with the truck surfing, but that kind of scares me.
All right. Well, we'll take that. That's a good answer for number 2. We got your final inappropriate question. And then after that, after you answer, Benny's got another little thing that he wants to say. But first, here's your final inappropriate question.
Andy, this program has got kind of a crossover vibe. A little bit of skiing, a little bit of snowboarding. One day, you decided I think I'll ski today. It's the last tram, last day, super fun. How'd that end up?
I think he's mistaken. I like skiing. I still ski when it's shitty. I've been like riding boiler bumps out here and groomers a ton, trying to get some legs for Baker next week.
Yep.
If I didn't have that, I would be skiing more just because I'm not a great skier. But I think Benny was talking about one year, I never drank and snowboarded. But at the end of the year, one year I had like a couple beers and then everyone goes down after last tram, the very last tram of the season. And I ended up messing around doing a nose wheelie off a cat track and hurt my knee. But I wasn't skiing, Benny. But those other two questions are going to cost you, my friend.
All right, well, maybe he can redeem himself with his last thing that he wants to say, and I will play it right now.
Side note, Andy, you're an inspiration to a lot of us that have a mixed family. I have no idea how you pulled it off, but the fact that you can raise children with your ex and her husband and you live blocks from each other, incredible. Congratulations, bud. You're killing it.
So that's Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast, and it really was a true history lesson from a dude who's one of the most respected snowboarders from snowboarders back in the day. You were a pioneer in the sport when it was a lifestyle, and while I considered myself a snowboarder back in the 90s, you and your crew helped pave the way for what snowboarding culture was, and I'll say the TB series, Creatures of Habit, and the Whiskey videos that played every single night where I worked at Vendettas and Vail will forever be burnt into my brain as they represent the best of snowboarding culture in my opinion. You were part of that, and that's so fucking cool. Thank you for paving the way, and thank you for your time.
All right, cool. Feeling a little bit like a Daryl, though. I'm not terribly worried, but God, we did party. We were pretty fucking out of control for a long time. Sometimes it's just tough to hear. Maybe that makes for good listening at times.
So that was time with Andy Hetzel, and Andy wanted to make sure that this podcast was dedicated to a dear friend of his that has gone too soon, Greg Glad. Greg was an amazing snowboarder, skateboarder, and an even better person. Rest in peace, Big Smooth. Losing someone sucks, and I like how Andy called after the fact to make sure that would be included. That's the kind of stand-up guy that he is. And like I've mentioned before, I love a dude who doesn't have a filter and wants to tell it like it is. With Andy, we recorded, and he said some things that painted a picture of how he lived back then, and I thought he maybe wouldn't want all of that out there. We discussed that, and I was like, while I never do this, how about I send you the edit, and you let me know if there's anything you want pulled. Like the badass he is, he was like, dude, this is perfect, no need to pull anything. I really appreciate him for that, as this podcast is one of the ones that really describes what the life and times were for maybe not everyone, but the skate-inspired snowboarders of that time. And when you look back to what they were doing and how they were behaving with the wild, sometimes unbelievable video parts and antics, it was cool to have a legend like Andy come on and verify that all that shit was true. That's the podcast. Now it's time for the review of the week. It's a 5-star review that comes from J.D. Sullinger. Here's the review. Listening to Mike's podcast has me either laughing, blubbering, nodding, or listening intently. Some at the same time. The shows are always a fantastic and fun journey into the world of skiing that we know and love. From the old days of freestyle park to pipe, slopestyle, and backcountry, Mike brings the players, skiers, boarders, and industry personalities that add richness, depth, and great stories. Thank you for that review, JD. And it's cool to find out from an email that you sent that you not only work for the Bunch family at Alpine Ski Shop in Oakton, Virginia, but then you left there and you moved to Sugarbush and met the Egan brothers before they were the famous Egan Bros. Pretty cool stuff, and if you shoot me an email with your mailing address at mike@thepowellmovement.com, I'll send you something for my dwindling stash of stuff. For anybody else that wants to win something or just wants to help me out, because these reviews, they really do help me out with the algorithm, you can always rate me on Spotify. And if you use iTunes, here's how you submit a review that I may or may not read on the podcast. First, hit the podcast icon on your iPhone. Second, search for the Powell Movement. And even if you've already subscribed to the podcast, you still need to do this step. Third, click my logo. Fourth, scroll down to where you see the stars. Fifth, star rate me. And you can review the podcast if you want me to read that review on the show. Thanks for taking the 30 seconds to do that for me, and thank you for listening. Finally, please support the brands that make this thing happen. They are Elon Skis, Outdoor Research, Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Best Day Brewing, and We Are Camps, which means Windell Ski Camp, High Cascade Snowboard Camp, and Seek Skateboard Camp. Have a great week, everyone.